welcome back to Food Prep Guide. Today is all about blueberries. We have blueberry bushes here on the property, but they are only on their second year here, so they are really only producing enough for fresh eating. But we visited our local blueberry farm recently. We had a blast, took the whole family. They had a bunch of different activities and slides and zip lines, and my kiddos really enjoyed those. And then we ended up picking about 2 gallons of blueberries total together. It was a hot day, but it was a fun day. So now we are back at home and we need to put them all up in different ways. I'm going to be showing you 7 ways to preserve blueberries, all the way from very simple freezing blueberries, usually using the flash freeze technique, and then we're going to be doing syrups and pie fillings and jams and even fruit leather like homemade fruit roll-ups and butters and all kinds of stuff, all things blueberries. So let's go ahead and get started. Welcome to Food Prep Guide. My name is Jordan. I'm a homeschooling mom to 3, living on 3 beautiful acres with my wonderful husband. A health crisis forced our family to change the way we think about food. Unfortunately, it also put us in financial hardship. Thankfully, the solution to both challenges was the same: to live off the land as much as possible. For us, that means growing a garden, preserving the harvest, raising chickens, and cooking from scratch. It's definitely a family affair. And friends, too. Meet Stacy, researcher, author, and lifelong learner. She entered the world of food preservation in the crazy days of 2020. She joined a gleaning co-op, and a local grocer offered her clearance produce in bulk. And so the adventure began. Together, we're reclaiming the old ways of food stewardship and teaching them to the next generation. If there's one thing you should know about us, it's that we love Jesus and seek to steward his blessings wisely. Our table always has room for one more, so y'all come join us. Let's start with freezing blueberries, because that's probably the easiest way to preserve them. And in order to freeze berries without them coming out in one big glop, we just need to flash freeze them. And all that means is laying them out on us in a single layer on a baking sheet or a freezer tray, just something where you can get all the berries in a single layer so that they are not doubled or tripled up. This just allows each individual berry to freeze individually so that when we go to vacuum seal them later, they won't get all clumped together. As far as timing goes, you just want to freeze them until they're nice and hard. I usually go overnight. That way I don't have to really think about it much, because if I let them freeze overnight, they will definitely be nice and frozen solid the next morning. I mentioned I do vacuum seal them. That's because it helps prevent freezer burn. It keeps the produce probably at peak freshness versus not vacuum sealing, but also the added benefit is that you're able to stack the bags in a flat layer. When you vacuum seal them, as you'll see in just a minute, if you haven't experienced it yourself, it gets pretty flat. The only tip that I have for you for vacuum sealing, it's pretty self-explanatory, but just cut your bags a little bit more than you, leave yourself a little bit more room than you think. That way you can cut the bag, get what you need, and reseal the bag, and do that over and over again and not have to get a new bag. Okay, next up is blueberry powder. This is a really fun project. All you just need a blender, your blueberries, your dehydrator trays, and this little raised edge silicone mat here. So what you need to do is you don't need a certain amount of blueberries, just whatever you have. Put them in a blender or a food processor, and then just enough water to allow your blender to move properly. You don't need a certain measurement. It's going to depend on how many blueberries you have, but you just need enough liquid to really get those berries going in the blender or food processor. And then once you have this nice puree, you're going to spread it out on that silicone tray. This is why we need a raised edge, because it is very, very liquidy, and it will roll right off your trays if you don't have a raised edge like you see here. But once everything's all nice and spread out, just plop that into your dehydrator. Set your dehydrator to 125 degrees Fahrenheit and just let it go until it's done. You'll know it's done when it's nice and brittle like this with no really sticky spots, although a little bit of glistening is normal. That's because of the high sugar content. So you just break up the pieces and put them into some kind of container where you can grind it. This is the dry container for the Vitamix blender. A coffee grinder works well. A spice grinder works well. You might even be able to get this done in a food processor. It would just take a little bit, and you might need to crush it like with the back of a spoon a little bit further to really get a fine powder. But that's really it. Just dehydrate and powder. This is excellent for flavoring
yogurt, oatmeal. If you want to make some blueberry cookies, you can just, pancakes is really good. Basically anything you want to add some blueberry flavor to instead of having fresh blueberries, you can get the flavor without the texture if you want it to stay nice and smooth in something like yogurt or like pancakes or something like that. I will typically vacuum seal these jars and store them on my shelf for usually last about a year, but I mean, it doesn't last that long. It doesn't last that long around here. Okay, next recipe is going to be some homemade fruit roll-ups. You can use any kind of fruit for this recipe, and all you need to do is puree it with some kind of sweetener. We really love doing blueberries with honey, but you can certainly use sugar, you can use agave, you can use coconut sugar, monk fruit even. Just getting some kind of fruit and pureeing it with a sweetener, that's all you need, and then put them in your dehydrator trays. You will need liners like you see here. And put it in the dehydrator overnight at around 125 degrees Fahrenheit. It does stay pliable and a little bit sticky, but that's just what fruit leather does. It's not bad or underdone. It's okay for it to be a little pliable and a little bit sticky. Next up is blueberry pie filling. And we need to start with making the filling part, the goopy part. And we need to start with 4 3/4 cups of water, 2 1/4 cups of sugar, half a cup of arrowroot powder. This is normally going to be clear gel. I do deviate from the tested recipe, and I will discuss that in more detail in just a minute. Next, we need half a teaspoon of salt, half a tablespoon of lemon juice, and then I like to go ahead and throw in a little bit of vanilla extract. As you can see, I don't measure, but just a little pour. If I had to guess, maybe 2 teaspoons or so. And then I usually go ahead and add in some sort of spice. Sometimes I do cinnamon, sometimes I do pumpkin pie spice, but for this go round, I decided to just not spice it in any kind of way and just let it stay with that strong vanilla type flavor. Once we got all of our ingredients in, we just give that a good mix and then bring that up to a boil. So I'm going to go ahead and turn my heat up to medium high and let that get boiling. Once we get to this stage, we need to be constantly stirring it because it does stick to the bottom of the pot really easily. But what we're looking for when it comes to doneness is for all these little bubbles for that surface. Like, this is exactly what it should be looking like when it's about ready. And when you stick your spatula in and turn it, it should very slowly drip off, not like it's water, but more like a thick, slightly thick syrup. So once that happens, you can take it off the heat and go ahead and start filling your jars. We are going to be filling our jars with blueberries to 1-inch headspace. Now, normally with fruits, we go ahead and do a 1/4-inch headspace for jams and a half-inch headspace for other fruits. But for pie fillings, they are notorious for siphoning. They are notorious for boiling over out of the jars. So for that reason, we need to leave a good 1-inch headspace on pie fillings. You can see that as I'm going through the blueberries, I'm picking out any that are underripe. I'm also picking out any stems that I may have missed during the washing process. Now, I don't show the washing process, on camera because, it's just washing fruit. But for everything that I can, I will soak it in a produce wash using food-grade hydrogen peroxide mixed with water. And that's what as a general rule of thumb, that's what I wash all of my produce with, but especially when I'm going to be canning. Because that food-grade hydrogen peroxide is a very powerful disinfectant without being a harsh chemical, if that makes sense. So I mentioned that I do deviate from the tested, proven, safe recipe for pie filling. So I am preserving my harvest the way that my family enjoys it. So don't take this video as here is the exact right way to can pie filling. Now, if you're a friend of Food Prep Guide, you know that I am a stickler when it comes to canning safety. So any of the variations that I make are not a safety issue. They are simply a process issue, and I have studied thoroughly and researched thoroughly to ensure that this recipe is still safe. With most pie fillings, you're going to be using clear gel. I don't like using clear gel because it is modified cornstarch. We have tried to eliminate modified cornstarch or modified pretty much anything out of our diet, and so for that reason, I choose to use arrowroot powder instead. I got this recipe and this process for fruit pie fillings from Three Rivers Homestead, Jessica. This is the way she does it because her family has some pretty severe allergies. Now, we don't have severe allergies, but we have that same just goal of eliminate modified stuff from our diet, especially when it's corn, because it's such a heavily sprayed crop and GMO crop, and corn starch is a byproduct of that. So that's why I have switched to arrowroot powder, and I have done the research so that I am comfortable with making that switch without being concerned. Another deviation is that the tested safe recipe cooks the blueberries first, cooks them down, and I don't. As you can see, I'm doing a raw pack here. Again, do your research, do what you're comfortable with. These are deviations, and I just want to let you know that if you are an absolute brand new canner, I highly recommend only sticking to tested, proven safe recipes with no deviations until you get some experience under your belt. Okay, so once all those jars are loaded, it's time to just fill it up with goop. So when we're filling up the pie filling, again, we want to give it a 1-inch headspace, and I normally have to go back through 2 or 3 times because that goop takes, it kind of filtrates those blueberries very slowly. And so what I do is I just go through, and I usually do 2 scoops per jar and then move on to the next one, even if it's not quite full yet. Because by the time I make it through all the jars and get back to the first one, that goop and filling has had time to settle. I need to come up with a better word than goop. Filling. That filling has had time to settle, and I can continue going through and topping off the jars to 1-inch headspace. So that's what I do here. Use the funnel because this stuff is really sticky, and we don't want to risk not getting a good seal. But we'll wash our rims good here in just a minute. And next, we just need to do the typical tasks for getting ready for canning, and that is to debubble first. This is an extremely important step for this particular recipe because pie filling tend to have a lot of air pockets in that filling. So we want to debubble very good all the way around, give it a good mix before we add our lids and rings. Next, we need to wipe our rims really well. Like I said, this stuff is really sticky, and it's almost impossible to not get some on your rims while you're putting it into your jars, despite the canning funnel, because the canning funnel itself has it on there. But because of that reason, I usually go ahead and have 2 separate cloths. You can see I just switched to a new one because it's just such a mess. And so having that second cloth on hand helps me to get my rims nice and clean. After that, we need to add the lids and rings. We add our rings to fingertip tight, which for me, I just go to the point of resistance and then just a slight quarter turn more. Picture the hands on a clock, like you're going from 12 to 3, just a quick quarter turn. And then we are ready to load up our canner. You can see I already had my canner halfway full with water, and I've had it sitting on warm this whole time. And then we just load them in and go ahead and submerge under the water. After we submerge under the water, we need to make sure that the water is a good solid inch above the jar line, and in this case I had about 2 inches, so we were good to go. We're going to go ahead and put the lid on and bring this canner up to temperature, which means I'm going to turn it all the way high. Once we're at a very hard rolling boil, we're ready to start our processing time, and this recipe needs to process for 30 minutes. Be sure to check your elevation and add whatever processing time is necessary. So as you can see, I mentioned that pie filling is notorious for siphoning and for boiling over, and you can see that happened here on 2 jars. The one that I just pointed to ended up sealing fine. This last one, or in the back here, it boiled over so bad, I didn't even give it a chance to seal, because, I mean, look at that. It's just, even if it did seal, I wouldn't feel confident in it because of how much goop there is between the seal and the jar. So I went ahead and just put that one straight into the fridge. And we use it for things like these sweet rolls, like cinnamon rolls, but with a fruit filling and fruit topping instead of like a cinnamon and sugar mixture. Okay, next project is blueberry jam. I have tried several different blueberry jam recipes over the years, and this is the one I always come back to because it has a pumpkin pie spice in it, and it just complements the flavors of the blueberry really well. So first we need to go ahead and crush up our blueberries. I started with 2.5 quarts, and in case I didn't mention it, I used 2.5 quarts of blueberries for the pie filling too. So we bought a total of 5 quarts at the U-Pick farm. And I used 2.5 quarts for the blueberry pie filling and 2.5 quarts for this blueberry jam. You can crush up your berries however you want. You can use a potato masher. I go ahead and run it through my food blender, but I don't puree it to a thin puree. I like it to be lots and chunks in my jam. So I leave it pretty chunky. And once you get everything crushed and pureed the way that you want it, go ahead and put it in a pot because we are ready to go ahead and add our ingredients. This jam recipe goes very quickly. So the first ingredient besides the fruit is 10 tablespoons of pectin. I use Hoosier Hill Farm, and they have a ratio on the back so that if you're not using exactly 2.5 quarts of blueberries, you can still make this recipe and just tweak it according to those package instructions. To that, we're going to add 1 tablespoon of lemon juice, and then 1 teaspoon of pumpkin pie spice. And if you don't want to use pumpkin pie spice, you can just use the mixture of cinnamon, cloves, and allspice separately. That's basically what pumpkin pie spice is. And as always, anytime I make anything blueberry, I add a splash of vanilla. Give everything a good stir, and then we will have to bring this to a hard rolling boil before we add our next ingredients. Just as a side note, this isn't technically part of the recipe, but if I'm stirring it and I notice there's not a whole lot of liquid, I do go ahead and add a splash of water just so that jam doesn't scorch when we're bringing it up to heat. I probably added maybe half a cup. I don't typically measure. I just kind of eyeball it. I just want enough liquid in there to where when I'm bringing it up to a high boil, it's not going to scorch the bottom of the pan. Once we're boiling, it's time to add the sugar, and we need to add 10 cups of sugar. I know that is a ridiculous amount of sugar, but that's what's needed to make the pectin set. There is a type of pectin called Pomona's pectin that uses less sugar. I haven't tried that. I just learned about it last year, and I just haven't gotten my hands on any yet. But if you are looking for lower sugar jams and jellies and pie fillings and all that, try Pomona's pectin. But we need to give that sugar a good stir and bring it back to a boil. And then once it is back at a hard boil, we need to boil it hard for 1 minute straight and pretty much stir constantly that whole time because it does scorch easily. Once it's hard boiled for 1 minute, you can take it off the heat and start filling your jars. I have already had these jars being heated in my dishwasher. So you do want to be loading this really hot jam into pretty hot jars, or at least really, really warm jars to avoid temperature change shock to the glass. But we are going to fill up the jars to a 1/4 inch headspace. I tend to go 1/2 inch headspace. All of your recipes say 1/4 inch headspace, which is, totally fine. But I just generally do 1/2 inch headspace for all of my jams and jellies. I find that 1/4 inch headspace just feels way too full, and I feel like I've had more lid failures when I had the food up too high in the jar. But between a 1/4 inch headspace and 1/2 inch headspace is what we're going for. After that, we'll just get our jars ready for the canner by debubbling and then wiping our rims, placing clean lids and rings to fingertip tight. I'll be using my steam canner for this processing day, but you can certainly use a water bath canner. I love my steam canner for jams and jellies, things that process pretty quickly. This recipe only needs to process for 10 minutes, but you start out by filling up the bottom of your steam canner tray until the water level is level with those little holes that you see here, which we have gotten to that point. And then we just bring up our heat to warm and get ready to start putting in our jars. There's no certain way that you have to load your jars. There's not like a certain pattern that you have to keep it, You just want all your jars to fit in there. As long as your lid can have a secure fit over your jars, you're good to go. The reason why I love using my steam canner for things that only take about 10 minutes to process is because the steam canner uses so much less water than a water bath canner, and because of that, it comes up to heat a lot faster. I can usually get 2 loads done in my steam canner for the time that it takes me to get 1 load done in my water bath canner. And that time savings is just so phenomenal and worth it to me. Once the canner is fully loaded, we bring it up to high heat and we're ready to start our processing times whenever the needle gets into the zone that is for your elevation. I have marked where my zone is, but everyone's elevation levels and zone levels are going to be different, so you'll want to check that. But this recipe for my elevation only needed to process for 10 minutes. So after it's done, I turned the heat off and I let it sit there for 5 minutes. I didn't record a clip for that, but I did let it sit there with the heat off for 5 minutes before opening that dome. And here is how it turned out. Up next is a simple blueberry syrup.
To start, we need 3 quarts of blueberries. My husband is building some shelves right on the other side of this wall, so if y'all hear any weird noises, that's what's going on. I'm going to go ahead and put 2 cups of water in here so that those blueberries don't scorch. And that's what the recipe calls for, by the way, is 2 cups of water. 2 cups of water, 3 quarts of blueberries. Quart number 2. And quart number 3. Now we're just going to bring this pot of blueberries up to a boil. I'll be back for the next step. Our blueberries are boiling, so now we need to mash them. I'm going to be using my just potato masher that I would use for like mashed potatoes. And we need to crush these berries pretty good and crushed. Let me turn down the heat a little bit. That steam is really hot. I'll pull it off the heat while I do this too. Okay, our blueberries are good and crushed now. So I'm going to put it back on the heat. And we're going to lower it to a simmer. And let this simmer for 12 minutes. 12 minutes. Our 12 minutes are up, and so for this next step, we need to transfer the contents of the pot into some sort of way to strain the juice out. You can use either cheesecloth, or this is like an old nut milk bag that I use. It looks a little dirty, but I promise it's not. It's about 5 or 6 years old, and it is terribly stained, but it does the job well. So I'm just going to put this in here. My nut milk bag doesn't have a big enough opening to just lift the pot and pour it in. But if whatever you're choosing to strain with is big enough to just pick up the pot and pour it in, that would be more efficient. For this next step, we need to strain our blueberries, and to do that we're going to put our bag up and hang it somewhere where we can just, I'm going to be doing it on one of my cabinet knobs, but anywhere where you can hang the bag over a bowl to catch the drippings, because all we need is the juice. We don't need the pulp, but we're not going to waste the pulp. We're going to use the pulp to make a blueberry butter later on, and I will link that video above whenever it's ready. So for this step, I'm just going to take my strings of my nut milk bag here, cinch it together, and very carefully line up my bowl to where it catches all the syrup, all the juice. Okay, so right now we have a steady stream of juice pouring out, but as as the juice gets less and less, it's going to not be pouring out as much, and it's going to need a little bit of help. So what I'm going to do is, this is going to be about an hour-long process. And about every 20 minutes or so, I'm going to come and check. And if I don't have a steady stream of juice pouring out, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the bag and start twisting it and gathering it like that, which is just putting more pressure on the pulp and helping that to squeeze out. And I'm going to take like this chip clip thing that you would use just to seal some chip bags, and I'm going to keep that there and hold that there. It's going to come undone, but it's still going to stay pinched right here. And every 20 minutes or so, I'm going to come and I'm going to move my chip clip down so it's putting more weight on that pulp, and so it's squeezing more out. So like I said, this is about an hour-long process. We want to squeeze out as much of that juice as possible, and we'll be back when we have all the juice that we need. So we are moving on to the next step of our blueberry syrup recipe. Our pulp and juice is just about done straining. And I ended up with double the amount of liquid, so I'm going to double the recipe. So we need 5 cups of sugar. To that, we will add 2 cups of water. Oh, there's a bay leaf in there. I store my sugar with bay leaves to keep the pests out. If you are interested in storing sugar for long term, we have a whole video on that, so I'll link that above. Okay, we're going to give this a good mix. And we're going to bring this to a boil. Now that this sugar water has come to a boil, we're going to take the lid off and boil it for 20 minutes uncovered. The 20 minutes are up, so now it's time to add our blueberry juice. Give that a good stir. Next, we need to add 3 tablespoons of lemon juice. And this is pure lemon juice, not from concentrate. Now we're going to let this return to a boil, which I think it's probably still going to be at a boil. Let's check and see. Yep. Okay, so now we're going to lower this to a simmer and simmer uncovered for 5 minutes. Our 5 minutes are up, so now we need to take this off the heat. I have already moved this over to my counter, and you can see there is foam kind of all throughout there. So what we need to do is we need to skim off that foam. So I just have a big spoon here, and I'm just going to go through and very lightly and gently skim my spoon off the surface and just place it in a little extra bowl here. We've skimmed off the foam, so now it's time to fill up our jars to a 1/4 inch headspace. Next step is to debubble. Next, we need to wipe our rims with a damp, wet towel. It's always important to wipe our rims, but when we're working with something sticky, like jams and jellies, it is extra important to wipe them really well. And I always make sure I fold over after every jar when I'm doing jams and jellies. Sometimes you can't really see the stickiness on there.
but it's there. Next step is to place clean and new lids and rings. The rings don't have to be new, but the lids do. And we will put the rings on to fingertip tight, which means we're not going to crank it down really hard. And into the canner they go. I'm going to double check to make sure the water or my jars are completely submerged by at least an inch of water, and they are. So I'm going to turn this up to high heat, place my lid. We're going to wait until this water comes up to a hard rolling boil before we start our processing time, and these need to water bath for 10 minutes. Remember to adjust for your elevation. Our 10 minutes are up. And here is our delicious homemade blueberry syrup. And last but not least is blueberry butter. What we need to start with is blueberry pulp that's left over from some other blueberry project. This could be blueberry jelly or a blueberry syrup, which is like what I just got this pulp from. So we need to start out with blueberry pulp. And what we're going to do is run that through our food processor until it's nice and smooth. Okay, now it's time to put this into a pot along with our other ingredients. So we need 5½ cups of blueberry pulp, nice and pureed through our food processor. To that, we will add 3 cups of sugar. To that, we will add 1 tablespoon of fresh lemon zest. One and a half tablespoons of lemon juice. And the recipe calls for a 1/4 teaspoon of nutmeg. I don't have straight nutmeg, but I do have pumpkin pie spice, which has nutmeg and cinnamon in it, which I think will be delicious. So I'm doing a 1/4 teaspoon of this pumpkin pie spice. But if you have just nutmeg, you can do just nutmeg. Now we're just going to bring this to a boil, and we'll move on to the next step. Now that this is boiling, we're going to lower it to a simmer and slow cook it for 1 hour. We'll need to come and stir it every few minutes. Our blueberry butter is about 10 to 15 minutes away from being ready to can, so we're going to go ahead and prepare our canner. I have filled my canner up halfway with water. I put it in my basket. I've turned it on medium heat, and I've got my jars in there warming up. Those are clean jars, and now they're getting in the process of becoming warm jars. We're going to be using this blueberry butter mostly for spreading on biscuits and toast and things like that, so we don't need a large portion of it open at any given time. So I'm going to be canning in 1/4 pint jars, but you can certainly do this in 1/2 pint jars as well. Our butter is done cooking, so now we're going to ladle it into our jars. And we're going to fill our jars to a 1/4 inch headspace. A 1/4 inch headspace is approximately right here, where my top finger is. Next, we need to debubble.
Next, we need to wipe our rims, get them nice and clean, so that our lids can get a good solid seal. Next step is to put on new and clean lids. And then we need to screw on our rings to fingertip tight. And into the canner they go. I'm going to double check and make sure that I have at least an inch of submersion, and I do. So we're good to go on that. I'm going to put the lid on, put my canner up to high, and we're going to wait until this comes to a hard rolling boil before we start our processing time. These need to process for 10 minutes. Be sure to adjust for your elevation. Our processing time is up, and here is our blueberry butter. Delicious on toast or a biscuit. This is going to be something that I will bring out when we do a breakfast for supper night as just an extra special treat on some toast or a biscuit. We have a whole video on what to do after you pull your jars out of the canner, and I will link that above. Hope y'all enjoy, and we'll see you next time. Bye.